So today we're getting to the last couple coats on the shelves and the desk, and then we'll start going into the drawer construction. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a technique called wet sanding. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use sandpaper, and I'm going to zoom on this in the film. Sandpaper that is waterproof. So basically I can use water as I'm sanding my workpiece. All right, now the reason why I would do this is because I want to get the highest quality finish for my boards, and I find that when I complement waterproof sandpaper with a lubricant, which we're going to use standard tap water, I can get a really nice finish, like a really nice polished finish before I put on my final coat. I can do this, you can do this as many times as you want after the second coat. The reason why you can't do it after the first coat is that the first coat, in some areas you're actually sanding it down to the bare wood. And then when you start to put water on it, it'll cause the grain to raise more than in some other areas, and you'll get this blotchy look. So normally we do wet sanding after the first coat. After the second coat. But there are instances where you can actually use wet sanding before it even finishes on the project. A great example of this would be water-based finish. So prepping your project with a spray bottle before you before you finish with water-based finish is actually a really good idea. And it is actually kind of recommended in some products actually on the label itself. So wet sanding is not exclusive to oil-based finish. You can also take this principle and use it for other finishes. The only one I wouldn't recommend is I wouldn't recommend wet sanding with stain, because again, stain is the first coat. It's not a top coat, so you're not using it to polish it. Polyurethane, whether the oil or water-based, is probably the best two finishing materials I would wet sand with. Other ones, I can't really speak to how they would react. You need to check what the manufacturer says, specifically with either natural finishes like beeswax, shellac, and other types of natural finishes. So with that said, let's zoom in a little closer and see what's going on. So one thing I'm going to state before I even start wet sanding is another alternative that a lot of people talk about, especially older woodworkers, is using a razor blade to scrape the finish down to a nice fine polish. Now this is great for small projects, so if I'm doing like a step stool or a smaller jewelry box, using a razor blade like a scraper to polish your piece is actually a good idea. But in this case, there's a lot of stuff to cover, and it's a really small blade. So we're just going to do wet sanding for this video. So what I'm going to do, just like sanding on top, I'm going to take my sandpaper and I'm going to wrap it around a piece of wood. All right, and now take my spray bottle and I'll lightly coat the surface. And I should see drips, so little drops, and I'm actually going to zoom in on this. So if you see these droplets on top, that's a good sign that you have a good top coat underneath to polish with. If when you spray it starts to seep into the project so you don't see these, you need to wipe off the water and just sand regularly until you get a nice finish on top. So with that said, let's get to it. So I've sprayed my surface, and now I'm going to sand with the grain. And again, I wet sand by hand because again, I don't get those machine scratches from the sander on my workpiece, and I get a nice polished finish. The other thing too is you shouldn't wet sand with electric tools because water and electricity don't really do very well together. So I don't recommend it. And it will gum up your machine. So when you're working with your own tools, for sure, don't wet sand with power tools. So now that I've sanded the entire surface, I'm just going to give it a quick spray down. And then I'm going to wipe it with my shop towel. Or you can use an old t-shirt, paper towel, anything you got on hand. But it has to be clean. Alright? Now I'm just going to do a test real quick just to make sure I got a nice smooth surface. Feels like I missed a spot right about there. And yeah, so right about there. I didn't go all the way to the end of the workpiece, so I just need to finish sanding that little piece there, and then this is ready for its final coat. So let's just put a little bit of water here. You can also, if you notice there's a lot of particulates on your sandpaper, you can always spray it clean so you're not just wiping the finish all over the project. So you can use the spray bottle to clean off the excess and then continue the work. So this piece is done. It's ready for its final coat. So let's work on the rest of the dresser. The emphasis on a surface where the customer is going to put their hands and the front parts of the skirt. You don't need to sand the insides as much. Yes, you should touch them up. Make sure that they're nice and clean and well coated. But again, I'm putting most of my polishing effort on the surfaces that are seen and felt by the customer itself. So I shouldn't feel any bumps or nicks or any parts of the finish at all on this entire project. So again, smooth to the back of your hand on any surface you intend to polish all the way up. So with that said, let's get to it. And another thing I forgot to mention is that this is 400 grit sandpaper. So you can do wet sanding from 400 grit all the way up to 1000 grit if you want. I don't think it makes sense to do it with 320 because normally 320 is used for the first coat of the project. And as like we said, unless you are prepping for water-based finish, where you're sanding the raw wood to get the grain to pop up, I wouldn't use 320 on an oil-based project. 320 water-based paper, waterproof paper on an oil-based project. Because again, you shouldn't be using water on the first coat. So let's just finish this up. Now I'm just trying to nice consistent strokes with the grain. I can't go across the grain on an angle, and I shouldn't scuff across the grain because now, since I'm polishing, those scratches are going to be more visible. Right? The other thing you might notice is that I'm not going all the way across the project. Obviously, I'm not that tall, but as long as I can complete those passes on the other side will be fine. So I'm going to go to the other side, and then I'm going to overlap by going this way. Now's a good time to check the paper. There's a lot of white milky finish on it, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly clean that off with a little more water. Because the cleaner I can keep this, the more finish I can take off while polishing, reducing the amount of work I have to do for this project. Now this looks pretty good, but what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to look from different angles and see if I can get the light to show any defects in the finish itself. And there is one I can see here, is I have a drip mark still pronounced on the finish itself, right about here. And you can feel it too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that technique I talked about before, where I'm going to use the razor blade, and I'm actually going to try to match this drip with the finish. This is a great technique where if you go back and you notice that you have a drip mark or a run mark, you can use the razor blade to help merge it with the finish itself and try to make it not stand out as much. So you should try to address this in the lower coat. So if you don't clean up drip marks on your first or second coat, when you start to get to your fourth, fifth, or sixth coat on top, especially if you're trying to go for a very high polish, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So again, the sooner you can address problems like this or errors like this, the better your project will be. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to hold the blade at about an 85-degree angle. All right? I don't want to be scraping like this because I'm not going to take anything off. I don't want to be holding it straight up and down because I might actually cut into my project. I want to hold it 85 degrees and draw across. So I'm actually going to zoom in on this. So I'm actually going to move this light around just to see if I can highlight this a little bit better. But right there, there's that little white mark in the center of the project, and that's actually leftover or excess finish from the last coat. So I must have had a drip mark when I was doing some of the work and I didn't notice it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try to scrape that. So let's try, there we go. So I'm going to come in with the card scraper. I'm not the card scraper. The razor blade. I'm going to treat it like a card scraper. Hold it at about 85 degrees. And I'm going to slowly scrape away at the excess finish and try to merge it with a layer around it. Again, this is just a great way to fix any type of drip marks or run marks you have on your project. But again, you need to address this before you get to your last coat. Because again, when you go to put your last coat on, it's just going to show even more. The reason why I'm not concerned about this is this happened in the last coat, so it's just on top of this current surface. If it was there before, so let's just say I didn't notice it from the first coat, I would have to be a little more aggressive in this, and I'd have to bring this entire zone back up to the same layer of finishing so it wouldn't stand out. So I could feel now that it's the same layer, so that there's no distinguishable difference between this side and here. And I'll do that to any other part of the project I notice. Is, let's just say you can't really control the dust into your area, all right? Because no area is completely dust free. So let's just say you can. How would you prevent it from sticking to the surface? And the answer is a cover. So again, I'm not putting this on top of my project. I want to put it or suspend it in a way that none of the ambient dust lands on it. Now, one trick is you can use 3 materials to create a cover over the entire project. So you can use leftover plywood, cardboard, or the cheapest thing, bed sheets, which again, everyone has bed sheets in their house, or unused bed sheets to cover your project. So again, I'm not trying to put it on top of my project where it's touching. I want to lift it up somewhere between 4 to 10 inches above, so that any ambient dust in the shop itself doesn't land on the coated project itself, on the last coat of the project. Now, the pros to bed sheets are you can also cover the sides as well, so no ambient dust can get blown in on the side of your project itself. So again, when it comes to those last crucial coats, so your final coat or your polish coat, to really fight any ambient dust from getting embedded on your project, you can use those techniques. When it comes to cardboard and hardboard, you can literally just stand it on top of some scrap wood. As long as it's, again, off your project, you're A-okay. Now, with bed sheets, what's cool is I can't do it in this space here, but you could actually, in a basement shop, so if you're downstairs and there's rafters above you, you can actually use fishing hooks, fishing line, and some thumbtacks, and you actually, I've seen people suspend the bed sheets just above their project, so it's not touching, but it's covering the entire project, including the sides itself. So again, I don't, especially with cloth, you don't want the cloth to get stuck on your project because it will ruin the finish. But it is a really good way of concealing your project from any ambient dust or particles, whether it be sawdust, regular dust, sand, pollen, anything that's in the area that you don't want on your project itself. So again, these last coats, I'm not going to do them outside because again, I really want to control the dust in the environment itself. So another tip is, again, if you're in a small shop, what's nice is you can really control the sanding itself. So if you have other things to sand during that day, you should finish all sanding first and then come back, clean off your projects, whether it be with water, because again, this is the second to last coat, so I can spray this down, wipe it down with a nice clean rag, and then start to finish, or I can use an air compressor to blow it down. So again, if you have other sanding to do during that day, don't put finish on it. Get everything else sanded, all the other projects done, because at the end of the day, probably like most likely for me, I like to do it closer to the end of the day so that, hold on, at the end of the day so that I can definitely ensure that the project won't get any dust particulates on. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Next time we're going to look towards putting the final coat of finish on the project, covering it, putting it aside. We'll probably actually do this down my finishing room downstairs, and then we'll start construction on the drawer itself. So with that said, I hope everyone's having a great week, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.